Hi there and welcome. My name is Lauren, and today I'm doing a video about how our family made the journey from New York City in Manhattan to the Dominican Republic, and then finally landing some years later in Buenos Aires, which is where I am now. And this is really for me to parse, but also because some of y'all in the interwebs have asked me questions about what's really going on, what's gone into these decisions. And to be frank, they are complex and involve a lot of moving parts, but I really want to dive into some of these aspects on this video and give you the narrative of how we got to here. And then I'll make a couple other videos about some of like the specific niche topics, I think. So if you don't know me, I'm Lauren, and I've been self-employed and an entrepreneur for almost 2 decades. I love lots of things, and I do deep dives into art, anthropology, sociology, psychology, chronic illness, super fun topic. I love real estate. I like crypto. I love fashion and green beauty and wellness. And so and pop culture. So my videos tend to be a real pastiche of things. If you don't like people who are maybe slightly neurodivergent and go on trains of thought off on tangents, then maybe you won't like me. That's cool. There are lots of other videos. The other thing is that I don't do a lot of cuts. I like to do one take, call it a day. I trust that you have the attention span to stay with me without needing lots of, jump cuts and whatnot. So if you want to hang, welcome to my long form videos. That caveat aside, today's video is really about how our family went from being a New York City family to going off the treadmill. And as I said, I've been self-employed for nearly 2 decades, and that almost entire time I have been a life coach and business coach. And certainly I do consulting for bigger businesses, but the crux of my work is always helping my clients figure out, how do they really want to be spending their time, those wild and precious lives, as Mary Oliver says. How do we really want to be spending our time? And once we know how we want to be spending our time, how do we get there? And I want to help people answer that question. And I certainly try to answer that question for myself, because at various points along the journey of the past more than 40 years, I realized that I was doing a lot of things that I didn't actually want to be doing. And I just sort of was conditioned to think that those were the things I should be doing. And when I started to peel back the truth of what I really wanted, I personally made different decisions, and then so did my family once I had a little family. So today the discussion is on the path from Manhattan to Buenos Aires. And we, as a couple, my husband and I lived in Manhattan. He had lived there for some 30 years. I had lived there on 3 separate occasions and loved New York. New York is a character in our lives. New York is a person, practically, because it's so embodied. The spirit is so tangible and strong. There's so much to love about New York City. And it is really hard to extricate yourself from the conditioning of what is important in the New York milieu. And we had it all. My husband worked a really good job. We had awesome healthcare that was free. And we had a fat apartment on one of the best blocks in the city. And, we had a daughter, and we had a country house. We went upstate every weekend. And so it looked on the outside like we were living that like New York life. And the reality of it was that Charlotte was sick. I was struggling with mental health. We were going upstate every weekend because we were renting out our apartment in Manhattan on Airbnb to pay for the second home. So every Thursday or Friday, I was like frantically packing everything away so that someone could come and stay at our house and not be like, ew, these people are slobs. And that was stressful. It was so stressful. I should point out that our apartment, we were on the top floor of the penthouse. of a walk up. So that meant that any clearing out had to be done via stairs. And when you have like an infant and then a 1-year-old and then a 2-year-old, that is hard as shit. So regardless, that was the life that we had created, and we had lots of wonderful times. I mean, we were paying for a lot of our mortgage with Airbnb, and our Airbnb customers were wonderful, some of whom we're still in touch with. And we also at the time had another house. So our people would be like, "Where do you live, Charlotte?" And Charlotte would be like, "I have 3 houses." And we'd be like, "Oh my God." Because that's a bit, I don't know, it felt weird to us, and that's maybe a topic for another discussion about perception around wealth. Okay, so I'll leave that for today. Anyway, we had this house that my husband had built with a business partner and a friend in the Dominican Republic, and it's in a town called Las Terrenas. It's on the Samana Peninsula of the Dominican Republic, which is a peninsula on the north side of the island, which means it's in the Atlantic. It's not a Caribbean area, and so it doesn't have the same sort of hurricane path, and it's quite unknown. Well, it was at the time. And so he built this house, and frankly, it was a money pit. And we would go for like vacation and like to work our butts off for a week, like doing things around the house, but it was a money pit. And a lot of things go into that, and corruption and this and that and legal fees and blah, blah. But we had these 3 houses that we were managing, and 2 were, well, we had all 3 of them on Airbnb. And so we would just kind of like go back and forth between the city and the country, and then always the house in the Dominican Republic was on Airbnb. But as the house declined in its maintenance, and a marine tropical climate is really tough on a house, the Airbnb reviews started to get worse and worse. And so we were able to charge less and less. So the money pit became deeper. In any case, we found ourselves in March of 2020, like everyone else, going, "Whoa, what just happened?" And at that time, our daughter was just starting to get diagnosed. She was probably in the peak of her illness, and we were at the end of our ropes, and like everyone else, also navigating COVID. And we said, "What are we doing with our lives?" Like many other humans started to examine what was going on. And we said, oh, there's one very important detail that I should mention. In 2019, in the summer, my husband lost his job, got laid off from Bloomberg. And that really threw us for a loop, because I had taken off 2019 to work on my health and mental health, because frankly, being a parent to a child with a neurological autoimmune disease sucks. And that also is another video, but it took a lot of work to get myself back online, if you will, just from a health perspective. And so I had basically stopped working in 2019. And so we went from 2 incomes to 1 income to 0 income. And then COVID happened, and then Charlotte's medical needs just like rapidly, increased. And we said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And we had this asset sitting in the Dominican Republic. And at the time, DR was closed like everywhere else. And we had another asset in the form of the apartment in New York City, but it was like the worst rental market, period. And then we had the house in the country. And so at the time, everyone was exiting New York, trying to find a place out in the country, because no one wants to be cooped up with 3 kids in a, 1,200 square foot apartment. So we were able to be very lucky, and we rented out our Manhattan apartment. We have great renters. And then we sold our house in the country for a nice profit. And then we moved to the Dominican Republic. And when we arrived there, we were like, okay, we can like stay here. It's a chill beach lifestyle. This will be great. You can probably sense that there is a big ass butt in there. And there is several. And the beaches there are stunning. It is a wonderful place for a vacation. And there are some wonderful people there. And we found that it was not a place for us. And there are a lot of reasons for that. The first one that came was that the local international school was really not able to meet the needs of a kid who picks up things really quickly. And so she basically had nothing to do, and she would finish her work and then like help the other kids, and it just wasn't appropriate for her learning. And so that was one huge disappointment. The second disappointment was we realized how bad the house was, and how from its inception it had never been constructed properly, and then it hadn't been maintained properly over the past 10 years, and that it was going to need a lot of work. So that was a big hindrance to the tropical lifestyle. And then the third was just realizing that a lot of the people who chose to go settle in that particular town, and there are tons of Europeans, there's like basically a French little colony, were, let's just say, not our vibes. Okay, there's a lot of alcohol, drugs, there's just a lot of partying, a lot of dysfunction. And then the culture at large was a culture of such scarcity that it felt like constantly being in a narcissistic vortex, where we became just walking ATMs for anybody who felt like they wanted to extract resources from us. And when you're treated not like a human, but like just someone to extort, it can feel really icky really quickly. So even if you're surrounded by these most beautiful surroundings, and our house rocks, frankly, it got really difficult to live a day-to-day life. Like the interactions that we had with people were so strange that it's very gaslighting, because you get to the point where you're like, wait, is it me or is it them? And you have to go check with people who are outside of that vortex to be like, can you help me out? I'm trying to parse the situation. And yeah, it was super duper weird. And so we were like, okay, we've got to do this renovation and then GTFO. So the stumbling block was the renovation. And if I knew then what I know now, I would have undertaken the entire reno on my own. I would have learned how to cut and lay ceramic tile. I would have learned how to do the minor plumbing that needed to be done. I would have learned how to do the minor electrics that needed to be done, because the pain and suffering of working with people who don't know a thing about what they're doing, but profess to know what they're doing, and then charge you tens of thousands of dollars to do said thing badly, it was a lot. It was a lot of pain and suffering, and obviously lots of dollar signs. And so, like I said, that was our stumbling block. We had this challenge that we had to get through in order for that asset to return to its money-making status. And as we were there in the first year and kind of getting a lay of the land and a feel for the place, and the world started opening up after COVID, the economy in that place boomed like I've never seen anything boom in my life. And obviously we're lucky to be able to ride that wave. I am concerned about affordable housing, and I'm concerned about clean water, frankly, for the people who do not have enough money to put in electricity and plumbing, or even a real roof over their heads. So I have significant concerns about how that part of the world is going to develop. And I'm glad that there are economic opportunities that weren't available before. And I hope that those economic opportunities visit the people who normally have to just make do with the trickle-down effect. In any case, that also is a much more complex discussion. But rest assured, DR really opened up their borders, and people started flooding in, and people are living in our little town and choosing to come from Canada and Europe and points in the US, because there are very few restrictions. It's lawless. You can do basically whatever you want, and nobody gives a shit about how their behavior impacts others. So it's like super fun. It's, like I said, not my people, but gorgeous for a vacation. Beaches, phenomenal. And we have this asset here. So we continue to plug through the renovation. And by the end of it, we found a delightful group of humans who are quite a mix. We have a wonderful man from Haiti who is working for us, and he brings in his family sometimes. And then one of his colleagues will help out. And then a wonderful woman from Mallorca who is managing the house and managing the Airbnb. And of course, our fave, people who've become like family to us, our Dominican housekeeper who welcomes the guests and every day is making sure that they're having a good and tidy experience. So by the end of it, we did find a small team of people who we could trust and are truly just wonderful people. And I'm really happy that we worked together. But we had to go through so much bullshit to get to that. I'm not sure it was worth it. So if you have any questions about investing specifically in DR, I'm going to do a different video about investing in renovation in foreign countries. But yeah, I will not undertake a project like that in the same way ever again in my life. It will look very different the next time. And I have some, I suppose, boundaries for how I would like that to go down if I do choose to do that again. And I will probably, just not in the same way. So here we are. It took us approximately 18 months to renovate the house. I hit burnout multiple times during that 18 months where I literally thought I cannot keep going with this nonsense, because it was like being in Alice in Wonderland, like through the looking glass, like what's up is down and what's down is up. It was very disorienting, but we had to keep going. At that point, we had no choice because we didn't have team. We hadn't found those wonderful people. And so we were still, I think January of 2022. So about a year ago, I was like, where are we going? What are we doing? We cannot stay here. Charlotte doesn't have a school. What are we doing? And we thought we would be digital nomads for a while, but then we realized that the way we would do that would cost a lot of money, and we still had the renovation. So we had this albatross that needed to be addressed. So we're like, okay, we have to stick in for the reno, but we're going to get out of here after that. And as we discussed our options, we had it was actually a really fun exploration as a family. We had criteria that included quality of life and quality of food, which is not something, Las Terrenas has good quality raw materials, but somehow they don't get made into really good stuff at the restaurants. The private chefs, however, are fantastic. But we can't afford a private chef every single night. So so we really wanted a place that had good restaurants and good food quality. We wanted a good education system, and we are happy in a place to pay private school fees. So we were thinking a private school education for Charlotte, and we wanted a nice climate that wasn't too cold. And so we started thinking about Portugal, because everyone and their mother, all the dude bros from California, are buying places in Portugal. Oh, also I like to surf. So I was like, if we can surf, that'd be great. And we have a couple friends who are already invested and living in Portugal. So we thought, okay, let's check out Portugal. So summer of 2022, I was already planning to go to Paris. We needed to go see my husband's family in the UK for the first time since before COVID. So it had been 3 years. And at the end of our trip, we tacked on a week to go to Portugal, and we hired relo consultants. We toured schools, and we went to both Lisbon and Porto, and then some of the small towns on the western coast of Portugal. And ultimately, for me, Lisbon was not it. I think the climate is a bit too dry for me. I love Porto. I think it's a beautiful place. If I were going to live in Portugal, I would totes live in Porto. But ultimately, the deal breaker was that if we're doing work on East Coast time, which we are, my husband is consulting with businesses that are located in New York. My clients are sort of in between Europe and the US, so it's easier, but also California. We thought, I don't want my husband to be in an office on phone calls from 3 to 11 at night every day. Like, that's not the life that I signed up for. That sounds terrible. So I don't want to move to another country, have to learn a new language. And my husband is going to be in an office for 8 hours a day, but during the prime family time. That just didn't sound nice and appealing. So ultimately we were like, Portugal's not going to work. And I have a funny story. I have a funny story about Portugal, but and I like Lisbon as a place. I think it's really beautiful. And we had just come from Paris, and when we were in Lisbon, Charlotte and I were getting off the subway, and we're coming up the stairs to come into the center median of one of like the grand avenues. And there was a group of like 40 Cub Scouts, mixed gender, so it was boys and girls, but they were probably ages like 15 to 19, and they were unchaperoned. They like do that, I guess, in Europe. That would never happen in the US. And we're all coming out of this really wide stairwell out of the subway into this grand avenue that's like the avenue, I can't remember the name of it, in Lisbon. And we're coming out, and this kid next to me he looks around the avenue, and he's like, "Ce n'est pas le Champs-Élysées." With such attitude. He was like, "This is no Champs-Élysées." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right." I like was laughing hard. And Charlotte was like, "Why are you laughing?" So I had to explain to her in English. And she was like, "Yeah, it's not like Paris." And she's like, "They don't have the same croissants." So no, Lisbon is different from Paris. And I knew that we weren't going to live in Lisbon, even though schools are amazing. I will say that. And Cascais is where like all the American expats, it appears, are moving. But for me, if I were to do Portugal, Porto is it. It's very lush and green. I like it. That said, so we're like, okay, not Portugal. We need something that's more East Coast time zone. What are we going to do? We ended up narrowing it down. We talked about Mexico briefly, but Mexico City got nixed because of the air pollution. And my daughter, with her autoimmunity, we're like, no. So then my husband is an Englishman, and he also grew up, his parents were expats in Argentina in the 60s and the 70s. And so he had grown up in a like wealthy suburb of Buenos Aires. It's called Olivos, and he had gone to school there. And there are a lot of Anglo-Argentines, like people who speak English at home, but are like Argentine. And they have like English names and stuff. So he had always wanted to live here. We came here on our honeymoon, and it ticked all the boxes. Excellent medical care. It's not expensive. You don't have to have legal residency to buy medical care here, to buy insurance. Nice restaurants. That is another topic too. But you can get some really good meals here, which is very refreshing. It is stupid cheap. Like there are so many things here that you're just like, a cab to take our daughter to school in the morning, it's a 20-minute walk, is $1. And this is a culture that they have this level of sophistication that the baseline education is phenomenal. And that's actually in contrast to Portugal. Portugal in the EU is known to be the least educated populace, which I didn't know, but after I started doing research, I discovered. And even though salaries are really low here compared to, let's say, the EU, the quality of life here is impressive, because things like wine are cheap, food is shockingly inexpensive. And so we're like, okay, let's do Argentina. And we were warned a lot about bureaucracy and slow things and, just the headaches, but we don't have a business here. We're not trying to do any renovations, and we're going to have very few like legal entanglements here. So we're not going to have to do much with the system. Our daughter just started school 2 days ago. She's like super happy. Apparently, I find this so funny. Apparently we chose the school that has lots of famous parents. I don't know the difference because they're Argentine. And that's one of the refreshing things. They're like, when you talk about like getting off the treadmill of like Manhattan and that sort of like New York, London axis of power, you get to this world that like exists outside of that gravity, and it's like, who cares? It's so refreshing. Like we're down here so far on the globe, And it just like, a lot of this stuff like doesn't matter. It's really, really, really nice. And because we don't have any sense of like who's wealthy or who's famous or who's important or who has power, like we legit don't care. And so it's really nice to just move about the city and meet people of all kinds. And Argentines freaking love foreigners. And so I have in my phone, gosh, probably 30 different numbers of Argentines that we've met in the past 2 months who are like, here's my number, anything you need, just call me. So nice. These people are so delightfully welcoming. Most of them speak English, people of all stripes. And it's incredible, truly. It's such a stark contrast to where we came from, where it was just like, oh, how can I get my claws into you? What money can I take from you? I'm gonna extort this from you. It's like so delightful to move around and not feel like people are just eyeballing us to be like, I'm gonna sell you something. And I say that about the Dominican Republic. That goes even more so for the expats than it does for the locals, just FYI. I'm not talking exclusively about Dominicans. I'm talking more about the expats that settle in that beautiful and stunning small town. They'd be weird. So here we are. We're just, I mean, we love this place. We've only been here 2 months. We still have a lot to do to get settled and to feel like this is where we're going to be for a while. But our plan was to be here for 2 to 3 years, and we definitely can see doing that, and possibly more. It will just depend on what we're feeling. And we came here because frankly, the money that we were making, you know, I was focused almost exclusively on the renovation. So I, again, had to stop working to focus on the reno and be the general contractor. I was also the interior designer and the procurer, and I became the painting subcontractor after like 5 horrifically botched attempts at painting the house by quote unquote professionals. And I did other stuff too. So I was real busy and couldn't work. I mean, it was impossible to do much of that while I was, you know, elbow deep in trying to get this house ready. And I have to say, I'm really proud of how the house turned out. And I'm excited. It's now on the Airbnb market. We're getting hits, and you know, that will continue to have a life of its own until we are prepared to sell it, which we will. And now that I am free from the obligation to manage the rental or the Airbnb, I now have time to go back to my work, which is essentially at this point, you know, coaching and creating workshops and creating experiences that help other people and businesses figure out, like, how do you actually want to be living your life? Like, what do you want to be doing and why? And then once you know that and you're clear about it, then we can say, okay, how do we start going about that? What does it look like? And I'm sure my husband and I are going to continue asking ourselves that question. And one little sidebar is that while we were in Europe and we were talking about our criteria for places to live, and we would like, I think, eventually to end up in Europe once my husband doesn't have to be on strict East Coast hours. So once I can retire him, essentially, with my work, and we have enough money that he doesn't have to work. So my mother-in-law, my husband's mom, her partner has lived and worked all over the world, really. And he was able to give us a short list of cities in Europe that we should look into, most of them in France and Spain. And so in the like further reaches of our mind, we're like, all right, in the future, we can consider another move that would take us in a different direction, obviously, from here, but closer to family. And Europe is so small, it would make it easy for us to travel and experience other cultures in a way that from here we're like super isolated. There's a lot to see in Latin America, and we're very excited to explore this country for the coming years. And longer term, I do suspect that we'll end up closer to his family, and also it's an easier across the pond trip to see mine as well. We're all on the East Coast of the US. So that said, here we are, we're in Buenos Aires, we love it. We can't believe that there aren't more Americans here because it's amazing. And we are super duper lucky. Our first apartment here was a disaster and ridden with black mold. And we now have found ourselves in an Art Deco renovated 2-floor apartment that used to be a hotel. And our family gets to live in it. So we're renting this for the foreseeable future. It belongs to a man who ran it with his wife, and it was the #1 B&B in Buenos Aires. And now it is our home. And you can see some of the beautiful stained glass over here. I haven't quite set up my office, so yeah, it's bonkers. Yes, we live in a hotel, which is so crazy to think. Anywho, if you have questions about, like, specific questions about this move, if you want to know more, I am going to do a specific video about real estate moves, because I think that real estate is a really interesting complement business-wise to people who are nomads and also people who are in information businesses, so coaching, training, whatever, because then you can kind of straddle economic trends and also shore up your long-term stability of the business. So I think it's interesting. So I will talk more about real estate, and I'll talk about my plans for my real estate portfolio, because I have some dreams, some heart's desires that I would like to see come to pass. In any case, that is a really long video. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about our crazy family choices. And don't get me wrong, there were some days when we got here and I was like, are we insane? Yes is the answer. But now I feel super comfortable here, and yeah, we love it. So, peace.